Good evening, my friends. This is Paul, and today I'm here to absolutely adore Paper Mario: The Thousand-Year Door and tell you all why I absolutely love this game. I know that there's a lot of people online that think that the only reason people love the first two Paper Mario games, sometimes the third, depending on who you ask, is because they are nostalgia blinded and they don't like change. I don't know about other people, but I know for me that is definitely not the case, because I'm the type of guy where I'm willing to admit when a game has been outdone. In the Zelda series, for example, Tears of the Kingdom is my favorite video game, but I don't think I would have been able to say that if I hadn't already had very strong feelings of nostalgia toward the other Zelda games that I was able to overcome by looking at Tears of the Kingdom and simply saying, I enjoy this more than the games that came before it. Point simple. Whatever the word is supposed to be. I used to adore Twilight Princess. I would give it like a 10 out of 10 score. I replayed it so much. I would go to as many people as I could and talk about the awesomeness of Twilight Princess and would be shocked if anyone said it wasn't their favorite game. And then Tears of the Kingdom came along and it made Twilight Princess look like a joke. Don't get me wrong, Twilight Princess still has its amazing moments, and I still would say it's a 10 out of 10. Tears of the Kingdom is just a 10 out of 10 game that's more fun to play. Honestly, scores are stupid in video games, but the point stands. If there were a Paper Mario game that came after Thousand Year Door that was good, I would be willing to accept defeat. Problem is, they weren't. Super Paper Mario had an amazing story and some wonderful writing and wacky scenarios, but it was held back by the game's insistence on only using a Wii remote and not letting you plug in the nunchuck, which led to a lot of hand cramping moments and really annoying puzzles that probably would have been a lot easier to solve if the game had just simply stayed as a GameCube game as was originally intended. Sticker Star ended up basically having no personality, with most of the characters just being toads of different colors and all the same height and no different variations and no gender and nothing like that. And the battle system was stripped down so that all the complexity, well, it had complexity, but it had too much. The battle system was too hard to understand. And then Color Splash just doubled down on Sticker Star by... honestly, I think in some areas it actually made it worse. I never finished either of the games because they were so bad. Origami King I did finish, and I did really like it. But at the same time, looking back on it, it still suffered from a lot of the problems that those early games did, like over-relying on toads as the characters, and forcing a complicated battle system upon the player just because they couldn't make it too much like Thousand Year Door. So what did Thousand Year Door do that was so terrible that Nintendo basically ignored it except in Smash Bros. For 20 darn years? Put simply, Thousand Year Door wasn't afraid to put Mario into situations that you would never expect him to be in, and that in and of itself made it cool, because they weren't afraid to just say, okay, this may be Mario, this may be the wahoo guy, but he is going to do some amazing stuff that's going to make him seem like an Avengers level threat. But in addition to that, it also managed to take the general gameplay philosophy of Paper Mario 1 and add extra complexity to it while still maintaining the simple to learn, hard to master, as opposed to the Origami King approach of make it a difficult system to begin with, and if it's too hard to master, just pay enough coins and the game will solve the puzzle for you. The way Paper Mario 1 worked is that you would have Mario and his partner on the left side of the screen and the enemies on the right, and you would choose to jump, hammer, use items, defend, or use star moves. You could also run away if you thought the battle was too difficult. And generally speaking, a lot of these moves were self-evident just by simply thinking about it in a semi-logical manner. If you jump, obviously you can hit enemies in the back. Mario can jump, that's like his thing. But if you jump on someone with a spike or fire, then you'll get hurt. Conversely, with the hammer, you can only hit enemies on the ground, and even then, only the enemy in the front. But the trade-off is that you have more power in the hammer, and you don't get hurt if you hammer a spiked or a flaming enemy. And then you have your items, which, you know, there's a variety of items that you can use, and most of the items, again, are pretty self-explanatory just by looking at them. A fire flower burns things, a mushroom heals you. And the star power moves, we'll get to those when we discuss them in Thousand Year Door. And the partners, they start out with only 2 moves, and eventually they get up to 4. And most partner moves have additional action commands that feel perfectly appropriate to what the action is. Now, one thing I will criticize the old Paper Mario games for is that the partners didn't really get a lot of depth after their initial introduction. In Paper Mario 1, most of the partners were kind of just there, like they'd have a tiny little story, but then after you got the person in your party, the character would basically just be a mouthpiece for Mario, which was very few and far between. Paper Mario 2, they weren't too much better. They had better backstories and motivations for joining, but again, once they actually joined your party, they were relegated to being the mouthpiece for Mario. Whereas in Origami King, sure, the partners were terrible in battle, but they provided a good supplement to the narrative. And I do wish that Paper Mario games going forward would do that. But getting back to Thousand Year Door and what it does right. So it maintains the jump and the hammer from the original game. But something that it does better is that it adds stylish moves into the mix. This time, if you press the A button at the right time, which mind you, the game does not tell you when to do them. In fact, the game doesn't even really tell you about stylish moves in the main tutorial. You have to seek them out and figure it out for yourself. In fact, the only way that I know of that you can actually figure out that stylish moves exist is, well, in the remake, go to the Battle Master Toad and there's some new tutorials, but in the original you would have to find a shopkeeper that sold a badge called the Timing Tutor, which would make exclamation marks appear when you were supposed to use a stylish move. And if you did the stylish moves, you would get more star power, which is used to perform special moves. You never need to do stylish moves, and I bet that there are some people who have gone through all of Thousand Year Door without even realizing that they exist. But adding these simple little button presses makes the battles flow much better, they're more enjoyable to look at, and they provide a practical benefit, and that's allowing you to use your special moves faster, but not too much faster. You still do have to balance them out, but you balance them out just slightly less by having slightly more skill. Same thing with the super guard. You can go the entire game without super guarding even once and still beat it just fine. The regular guard from Paper Mario 1 still works just as well as ever. Maybe the framing is a little bit easier to manage this time around, but the super guard is an extra tight maneuver where you have to press the B button, not the A button. The A button's for the regular guarding. The B button at pixel perfect timing. But if you master it, you will take no damage from the enemy attack, and if the enemy is attacking you directly, then you will counterattack the enemy's moves. So this is a high level skill that puts you in more danger because, again, you have to press a different button. You can't press A and B at the same time, and you can't just mash the button hoping that it'll work. You really have to commit to it and be willing to put yourself in danger. But if you master it, you have the opportunity to take less damage and defeat the enemy faster by dealing counterattacks. And in fact, the remake seems to realize that probably a lot of people did just ignore it because the timing was so tight, and added a secret boss, which I will not spoil where or who the boss is, but let's just say that at a certain point in the battle you are required to super guard against that boss, otherwise you will not be able to beat it. Honestly, I never would have thought such a change was necessary, but now I'm so glad that that change exists, because I thought to myself after I beat Paper Mario on the GameCube, I'm a Paper Mario master, I got this, and that boss destroyed me the first time around. Because it just didn't even cross my mind that I needed to use super guards, because I thought I can just get through the game without them. And it made me appreciate that genius inclusion to the battle system even more now that I actually had to think about it. Now let's move on to the special moves. Now special moves existed in Paper Mario 1, but all they were is you just select from a menu what you wanted to do and the animation would play out. In Paper Mario 2, you have to use action commands to use your special moves, and some people might think, oh, they just added more complexity to them. But the trade-off is that the special moves themselves are significantly more powerful than the best attacks in Paper Mario 1. For example, my favorite star move when I did my badge point only run in the Thousand Year Door remake was Power Lift, which, if you execute it correctly, you get more attack and more defense. And this is absolutely crucial when you're doing a BP only run because you're not able to upgrade your hearts or your flowers. And the only way you're able to get more of them is by equipping HP plus or FP plus badges. So all of these extra powerful moves that you would use in a normal run become dangerous to use because you have to prioritize your defense by making sure the enemies can't give too much damage. And the fact that the game allows you to do that, I am not a speedrunner, I am not one of those challenge types of gamers by any stretch of the imagination, but the fact that I was able to pull it off shows the genius of Thousand Year Door systems. Because the badge system is such a great way to incentivize players to upgrade. And again, this already existed in Paper Mario 1. Basically, badges are just additional ways to get abilities like more health, more defense, or sometimes even entirely new maneuvers. But Thousand Year Door added a couple of interesting twists to the formula to make them slightly more complicated, but also to be slightly more worthwhile. For starters, I discovered this the hard way just today. You can only upgrade your badge points up to 30 in Paper Mario 1. In Thousand Year Door, you can upgrade your BP up to, I think it's 98. And you might be thinking, you need that many more badges? Because the game's enemies are significantly harder than they were in Paper Mario 1. The final boss in Paper Mario 1 is probably about the same level of difficulty as like maybe the middle boss of Thousand Year Door. Like things really ramp up, especially toward the end. And as a result, you need these more powerful badges. But other changes that Thousand Year Door system does is it gives you more badges. And what I mean by that isn't just, oh, new badges with new effects. I mean you can find duplicates of badges that already exist. Like you can get multiple Defend Plus badges, for example, and you can stack them on top of each other to give yourself even more defense. You didn't really need all those buffs in Paper Mario 1 because you got more than enough upgrades and items, and the enemies were simple enough that you could easily defeat them if you had enough skill. Whereas in Thousand Year Door, you have to really up your game. It expects you to have played Paper Mario 1 and master it. And that is why they're willing to make the game tougher while still making the actual systems themselves approachable. In fact, this game has to have one of the most user-friendly approaches to a level up screen I've ever seen. Even in a similar RPG like Fire Emblem, when you upgrade a unit, you see a bunch of numbers going up, like HP, speed, defense, skill, and most players, when they play Fire Emblem, probably aren't even paying attention to all that, unless if you're one of those die-hard Fire Emblem people that are obsessing over skill trees and stat growth and all that stuff. But the average player is just going to think, what do all these numbers mean? But in Thousand Year Door, and again, the original had this as well, you had 3 options. More hearts, which are your hit points, more flowers, which are basically your magic points that you can use special attacks, and more badge points so that you can equip more badges. And these 3 simple choices allow for a game with so much replay value because there are potentially endless amounts of customizations of how players can optimize their badge layout or how much health they have just by simply deciding one of those 3 options. And thankfully Thousand Year Door gives you so many more badge points than Paper Mario 1 does. Now, a lot of what I've discussed was already in Paper Mario 1, so what does Thousand Year Door do to differentiate itself as opposed to just putting in a couple of quality of life improvements? Well, it has the battles take place on an actual stage with an audience watching you. Admittedly, this doesn't seem like it does too much at first, but it does help to spice up the battles just enough to make things from getting too repetitive, as seems to be the case in my most recent playthrough of Paper Mario 1. For starters, the enemies will sometimes throw things at you, And in the original game, this was a very frantic moment where you'd have to scour the audience and make sure that the item that they're throwing at you was something helpful, and stop yourself from pressing that X button as the game prompts you to so that you can get the helpful item, or realize, shoot, that person's gonna harm me, and so I have to press the X button to attack that person and get them out of the audience. In the remake, the action kind of slows down so that you have a chance to think about what's being thrown at you, so it does remove a little bit of the tension, but not enough where it ruins the pacing of things. There's also other stuff, like fog will appear on the stage and make it harder for both you and the enemies to hit each other, or things will fall from the background. And the remake tries to make these slightly more predictable. Like, there's an additional tutorial that wasn't in the original that talks to you about how if you hit your hammer enough, it'll cause the background to shake, whereas I think it kind of just happened whenever it felt like it in the original. And it helps the game have more of an artificial feel to it, while at the same time, you think that the stage is just an aesthetic choice and that it's not actually affecting the game you're playing. Because I think the implication of Paper Mario 1 was that the whole thing took place inside a storybook, and so you were just reading a story of how the adventures of Mario saving Peach played out, that someone was retelling it, and so that's why everything was made out of paper. But Thousand Year Door, despite that it keeps the paper aesthetic, doesn't feel like the kind of thing you'd see in a story, even though it does technically have a storybook intro. But yet at the same time, it did just enough with the paper mechanic while not over-relying on it. Mario learns these paper abilities that allow him to take advantage of the fact that he's made out of paper to do some fun things, like turning into a paper airplane. And the way these abilities are given to you are so funny. You meet these black chests that urge you to let them out, and they'll give you a reward, and it turns out that it's just a spirit that curses you with these new abilities, and they make it out like they're so horrifying. They're like, I'm gonna put a terrible, horrible curse on you, and you're gonna be so annoyed that you're gonna turn into a paper airplane. I suppose you could fly with it, but that's the only good thing. And it's absolutely hilarious every single time, especially when Mario starts picking up on this pattern and he starts calling out the other chest saying, I know what you're going to do by now because the previous chest did it. And they're like, what? Me? Are you joking? Why would I ever do a thing like that? Generally, Thousand Year Door is one of the funniest Mario games ever made. It is just constantly full of so many laugh out loud moments, but not in the same way as the later Paper Mario games. Sure, those games were funny as heck and had some really amazing localizations. I especially loved how apparently Color Splash actually added jokes that weren't even in the original Japanese. Like, one time Huey said, what in the lost levels is that Toad doing out there? And there's like no equivalent in Japanese. And those moments are funny, but they feel more witty. Like the game was trying to be funny to make up for the fact that it didn't have anything else to offer. That, well, if we have all these generic Toads, we gotta make them stand out somehow, so we'll make them have all these crazy one-liners. But if you're constantly fed these one-liners, they start to get a bit annoying, especially when a lot of them are based on the fact that the characters are made out of paper. In Thousand Year Door, the lines are just flat out funny, and I don't really want to spoil any of them for you, but let's just say that very few of them revolve around paper or being too self-aware, and the times that they are self-aware, because they come so infrequently, they're more impactful to you because the game knows to spread it out, give the player time to expect, okay, we saw that fourth wall breaking joke, so we won't see one again for a while, only for the player to be surprised when it does show up. Of course, Thousand Year Door is most known for its settings, and that's what really sets it apart as such an amazing Mario game. Sure, the first world is just your typical grass world, but from Chapter 2 onward, things just really ramp up in the amazement factor. Nothing is as cookie cutter as it seems. Even if something seems like it would be ordinary, Thousand Year Door adds some kind of twist to it to make it more fun to explore, and it adds like little mini stories in each chapter so that you have a goal within that chapter, while it's also helping with the overarching plot. The overarching plot is find the crystal stars to open the 1,000-year door so that you can figure out what the treasure is and hopefully save Peach in the process. But there's many objectives of how you get each star. And again, don't want to spoil any of them, but it is some of the coolest moments in the Mario franchise. Not just the side series, the Mario franchise as a whole. Even something like Super Mario Odyssey can't even come close, because the best thing those can offer is just, hey, more opportunities to have fun platforming. 1,000-Year Door isn't afraid to mix it up. There might be chapters that involve mystery solving. There might be chapters where you go 2 hours without any combat. And there's even cooler stuff besides that I just mentioned. Now, before I continue talking about what I love about 1,000-Year Door as a whole, I want to give special attention to a part of the remake that I didn't think was even possible, and I don't think too many games in general are able to accomplish this. The remake completely redid the soundtrack from the ground up, trying to use the music style of the later Paper Mario games, which are some of the only things about those games that I like. And they did the unthinkable. They took a soundtrack that I despised with a passion and made it into a soundtrack that I adore. 1,000-Year Door on the GameCube was the type of soundtrack that I would, when I'm in a charitable mood, call the type of soundtrack that you would listen to when you're on the toilet, or if you're playing a video game where the setting is going inside a toilet. Think Banjo-Kazooie and Mad Monster Mansion, or the entirety of Conker's Bad Fur Day. Like the kind of soundtrack you'd hear in those kinds of settings, because they'd use such weird instruments and everything was so high-pitched and annoying. And the remake made it more big band and grand and celebratory. Rogueport alone, the hub world, feels like the kind of thing you'd hear at a dance party. Sure, it may not sound as atmospheric as the original, but I'll take that over the MIDI nonsense that the original tried to use. And perhaps one of the best things that the soundtrack did is it took the really annoying battle theme of the original and spruced it up in ways that I don't think any of us could have predicted. For starters, Paper Mario 2 had the unfortunate side effect of repeating the same battle music over and over and over again. It was this obnoxiously cheery song with some really annoying synths that just got on my nerves, and it was especially immersion breaking when this would even play in the final level, where you're supposed to be building up to what is the reason why we had to open the 1,000-Year Door, why was it sealed, what are we leading towards, only to have this happy-go-lucky carnival music playing. It was terrible. But in the remake, they made it so that the battle theme changes depending on where you are in the game. And this alone automatically makes the soundtrack so much better, because now the battle music actually reflects the environment that you're in, therefore making the experience feel like the game is trying to be more immersive than it was. And this goes for just about every track in the game. I watched a YouTuber, I forget which one, but I watched a YouTuber comparing the original to the remake for a few of the songs, and I could maybe only think of one song in the entire original that I liked better than the remake. And I tried really hard, but I just don't like the GameCube synthesizers. There's something about it that just doesn't do it for me. I didn't like Wind Waker's soundtrack. I didn't really like Mario Kart Double Dash's music. Super Mario Sunshine, Delfino Plaza was okay, but everything else was kind of terrible. 1,000-Year Door was no different, but in the remake, it's a completely different story. So 1,000-Year Door has amazing chapters full of incredible writing, a simple-to-learn, hard-to-master battle system. The remake adds a phenomenal soundtrack on top of that and touches up the graphics so that it looks like Origami King while not looking too much like Origami King, so that it preserves what the original art direction got right. It adds all these little touches, like there's a certain part in Chapter 4 where the remake just stops having music. And again, when you get to that point, you'll think that that was a very effective choice. And while the remake doesn't add a whole lot of new content, it is worthy of praise simply by the fact that 1, it radically transformed the soundtrack, 2, it's a portable way to play the game, 3, it's Nintendo's way of saying that they're listening, that they're finally, after 20 years, acknowledging our love for this masterpiece and giving us hope that we could get more of this in the future. But to those that love the newer games, it incorporated just enough elements from those games so that Nintendo is also saying, we're not completely ignoring you guys either. Maybe we will make a game that's more like Origami King, but we'll take elements from Thousand Year Door so that we respect both audiences. The remake is a way for both sides of the Paper Mario fandom to come together and say there were good things about both series. There is no need for Nintendo and Intelligent Systems to try to isolate the other and say that one cannot exist without the other. But even if the remake didn't exist, Thousand Year Door was willing to take Mario in bold new directions while still keeping the same basic gameplay from Paper Mario 64, just adding in a few additional tweaks here and there. It was basically Paper Mario 64 on more powerful hardware, but in the best way possible. And sometimes that's the best kind of sequel. That's why I loved Twilight Princess. It was basically Ocarina of Time, but better. And that's why I loved it so much. Now, do I think that sequels should always do this formula? No. I think if we had another game that was like Breath of the Wild, I think that would kind of wear out its welcome. But Tears of the Kingdom was good enough while it was, but I do think I'm willing to admit that I think the Zelda series needs to do something at least a little bit different. But in the case of Paper Mario, add in the good partner system of Origami King with the good partner action of Thousand Year Door, we can get a good partner system. Add in the cool scenarios from Origami King with the cool battles of Thousand Year Door. Just bring it all together and we could get an amazing Paper Mario game. And hey, these are the same people that made Fire Emblem. So if you like the Paper Mario games and say, wow, this team is really good at making RPGs, maybe consider giving the Fire Emblem games a try. Path of Radiance only came out a year after Thousand Year Door, and if you watch this right next to my Path of Radiance video, you'll probably see a lot of amazing similarities between the two games in terms of how their narrative and their simplicity are quite similar to each other, honestly. And if Thousand Year Door can help people to appreciate Fire Emblem more, then there's another reason to celebrate its existence. So with that, I hope you guys will try out one of my favorite games ever, either on the GameCube or on the remake. Probably the remake, just so that you can give Nintendo a message that we want more of it. And I can't believe I'm saying this about a $60 game, but it's more cost effective at this point. And just find a Mario game that is not afraid to make Mario cool. And I still haven't even talked about all the game, but I think I will leave that for you to discover for yourself, so that you can still have some level of surprise, assuming the trailers and the internet haven't already ruined it for you. So with that, thank you very much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed the video. Let me know what you think after watching this. And until the next time, remember to keep the faith, stay epic, and God bless. Bye!